I now hand you to the capable voices and opinions of Mr. Paul Seiji and Mr. Steinski.
Thanks, Tony. Hello.
Thank you, Tony.
So we thought it'd be better that we just talked about technical things rather than embarrass ourselves in the studio, when I'm sure that most of you can probably use reason. The thing about this came up, and I said, well, I think people are surprised when they find out that I've made the majority of my music on just the Cubase Atari for the MIDI and an EMU64 for producing all of the sound, including the synth sounds, chopping up the vocals, putting it on the sampler, all that kind of thing. Whereas Steve does everything on Pro Tools, obviously. I think the sort of common theme that we both agreed on was that there seems to be a sort of obsession about gear and technology, which neither of us really seem to feel the same way about, I think.
I mean, one of the things that happens with me, working in the New York metropolitan area with a lot of guys who have grown up in the world of technical music making and working in the studio, is that I, sort of grabbed onto Pro Tools and learned how to use it, and now I have a Pro Tools 5.1 system with a whole lot of plugins, and that's fine. Works great for me. Of course, now I'm constantly meeting guys who say, well, you're going to be getting Pro Tools HD, right? Like, well, no. I mean, there's really no reason for me to be sampling at 196K. Dogs can't hear that. Why do I want to spend another $25,000 on the boxes that are going to let me do that? And then there's, other people are like, well, Pro Tools 6 is out, man. You're going to be getting OS 10, right? Like, well, no, because then I'd have to reinvest in all the plugins again. And then there's, and then I'd have to also learn OS 10. And I'm not going to get a G5 and all of the other things. But I work with people to whom this is the logical next step. You must have that. You must have that. The fact of the matter is, I don't really think that you must have that, like not at all, because no one who's buying your record or who isn't buying your record is not going to buy it because, oh man, listen to that, he didn't sample at 196K. Pooh, what else you got here? I mean, this is not logical. This is not sensible. It's a consumerist attitude towards it. It's like saying, listen, it's not that far from, listen, if you're playing the guitar, you need to learn how to play the guitar. You don't need it. Having a better guitar is not going to help you learn it better necessarily. I mean, yeah, if the strings are closer to the fretboard, it might be a little bit easier to learn some of the changes and the things you need to do. But for the most part, you just need to practice and you need to learn and you need to know the thing fairly thoroughly. So that's one thing that seemed to be a good area to chat about, is the urge to upgrade, the urge to move on to the next version, and it becomes an end in itself. And like I said, I think it's a very consumerist attitude. You can get completely lost in this and really only end up skimming the surface of the capability of the software that you're talking about or the music you're trying to make, because you're really more caught up with the wrong aspect of it. You're not sitting there, thinking, great, this is how I can use this to make a better beat or make the vocal more sinuous or whatever it is that you'd like to do. You just kind of, it simplifies everything. I got to have the new thing. It's like,
I think it becomes a distraction, doesn't it? I mean, when you're, perhaps, especially if you're not so confident in terms of your production and things like that, it can lead to allowing yourself to get distracted by that, because it becomes easier to get distracted by that than to actually...
The belief is that the newer thing will help you get over the problem you're confronting, which, at least in my case, I have found to be relatively rare. The new thing doesn't help me get over it. It generally presents a half a dozen problems which are good distractions from the thing you were trying to solve in the first place. It doesn't do that. The book says it should do that. Why doesn't it do that? There must be some preset because it's not working correctly, blah, blah, blah. And 4 hours later, you've completely lost whatever idea it is that you were originally trying to go for, and you're just caught up in the back alleys of the software. Yeah. So I guess that's a point we wanted to make, and if anybody would like to bring that up in a minute, that's probably something we'd like to address. Now, something else we were talking about too. Yeah.
I'm not sure. Well, staying on this topic anyway. For me, I think I talked about this before on Friday. I've actually found that upgrading to new equipment has presented problems for me, and I feel like I lost my way a little bit in the last year, struggling to get to grips with the new technology, and being a bit useless on computers generally. I've really been struggling with Logic, and so I could maybe coming to the Red Bull Academy and taking some courses or something. But moving to Logic was I don't know, I regret having to leave the Atari behind just because it's becoming obsolete. But it was a really sort of tactile, easy to use software. Now that I'm using Logic, I find myself stuck with all these sort of intellectual problems that I have to overcome, and I feel a lot further away from being able to instantly make music. I think actually over the next couple of years I'm going to be looking to buy up as many Ataris as I can find, get them all in good working order, and then have them sort of stored so that as they break down I can just sort of bring the next one into use again. And also, also on the sampling side, I did experiment with trying to use the EXS-24 and battery and stuff like that. But again, I found that not being able to have my hands on the instrument and having an audition button where I can go and really feel like I'm somehow in touch with the sounds that I'm making, that didn't really work very well for me, as was using Recycle to chop everything up for me. That was a laziness thing, but I found that actually when I am a bit more diligent and I get down to work and I chop everything up by hand, that's where a lot of my creativity comes from in my creative process, where I'm chopping something up by hand, and as a result accidents happen, or I hear things in the break, or I hear things in the sample that I wouldn't hear if I just put the thing through Recycle and got it to chop it up for me. So there's definitely a lot to be said for the old school methods of working.
Well, I think part of that again is you can be too efficient. The new thing can do too much. I find myself a lot with, the melodic loop up here, or the melodic line, and the drums down on another couple of channels. And the drums sort of fit and they sort of don't. And yeah, I suppose I could use in the version of Recycle, or a type of Recycle that occurs in Pro Tools is the Beat Detective, which will, just separate everything for you, boom, like this. And I don't like to use it for exactly the same reasons that Paul is talking about, because as I'm sitting there cutting it up and moving it and shifting things around a little bit, there's all manner of possibilities that seem to come up. Oh, this actually sounds a little bit better if this is a hair behind, or just, I could just get rid of this and that would be fine. And it's part of it becomes part of the creative process.
I think that definitely in the 80s, for instance, a lot of soul and jazz music really suffered as a result of this kind of need to upgrade to the new sound, and everyone feeling like they have to be moving with the times, and so from having the wonderful sounds of the 70s analog gear, we then went into the 80s, and some of our great heroes of soul started using horrible synthesizer sounds. I think the Crystal Rhodes is probably the biggest offender, and as a result, a whole sort of decade of music almost became really horribly unlistenable to.
That's the other thing, is you can get too caught up with what the current big sound, and you go back and listen to that a year later, and it's like, what was I thinking of? Oh, God, it's awful.
Yeah.
It was like you get in that fever of, we're going to have a hit. You know, it's like, no, it's not that easy. You know, not that easy.
So what you're saying is, it's the painter, not the brush, but does the brush contribute? How much? Is choosing the software still an issue?
It's, I think it's just a matter of learning what you got. If you're comfortable with it, and if it can do in the end what you would like, you know, there might be some extra, you know, there might be some extra steps involved, and it's less efficient. I think that's fine, man. I mean, people just do it.
I think some really great music and some really innovative sounds have come out of people having to push the technology that's available to them to do what they want to do. For instance, you know, either back in the days when the technology wasn't advanced, or situations where people just don't have the budget to be able to do it. It means they really want to get this sound, but they have to do the closest approximation using the equipment they've got, and then they end up coming out with something that's, wow, this is, you know, brand new. This sounds really crazy. So, I mean, there's definitely something to be said for, you know, having a piece of gear, just working with that and pushing that as far as you can go, you know.
Yeah. Oh, Mr. Moog, what can I possibly tell you?
I wanted to comment on this painter versus brush business here. You know, so far everything you've said, I'm wondering what I'm going to say tomorrow, because you know, what you say is so true, even though it's going to put all us engineers out of work, you know.
Oh, never, never.
Well, yes, the brush matters, but not by itself. The brush matters to the extent that you're comfortable using it, that the ideas can flow through your brush beyond, you know, to whatever you're painting. You can't, nobody can hold a brush up and say, you know, this is the brush for everybody, for all painting.
Yeah, that's very much the case. I mean, I'm happy to be working in Pro Tools, because there is so much at this point that I don't know, and that in my copious spare time I can sit down and go, well, you know, I'm not that familiar with how the MIDI part of this works. Let me, you know, hook up a couple of the, you know, the virtual synthesizers here and see what I can get that happening. Because all of a sudden, you know, I find, oh, what do you know? It's like I can get an arpeggiated bass line here, and I can tell it what range to work in, and it's like, oh, smoking. And it's like, all right, well, it sounds a little mechanical, but I can then bounce it to a track and mess with it, and, you know, yeah, I mean, you know, it's digital editing stuff, and it's wonderful, because it keeps, you know, it's like you want to get to the end, you don't ever really get to the end. You know, it keeps moving away from you a little bit, that next function, and it's like I can't sell people on Pro Tools, but at the same time, don't forget that before there was software, there were just people in front of microphones with instruments. You know, so, you know, what may seem like the best and most convenient thing for you, a lot of the records you like were made with no technical stuff whatsoever, except a couple of microphones and a tape machine, you know, and a really hot drummer and a really good bass player, you know. So the getting caught up in the technical aspect of things is, I think it's a blind alley somewhat. Yeah.
I think that's probably led to a lot of the criticism. For instance, people who don't like electronic music, you know, they say, well, where's the music? Where's the human touch in this music? You know, and I think, you know, perhaps the only way to get there is to become so familiar with your equipment that it really becomes like an instrument, like a real instrument, for instance. You know, so you can't really do that if you're constantly changing your technology. You know, you have to really become, you know, feel like it's something that's so close to you that you can just directly express yourself through it. I mean, when I started using Reason and Recycle, for instance, you know, I was making beats, but I realized that they sounded like beats that anyone could have done, and my particular signature sound had completely disappeared. And one of my Alex from the Bugs in the Attic, he said, yeah, I know, Recycle. It's like having pre-chopped carrots. You know, there's nothing really, there's no good ingredients there.
Because I do have the feeling that too much technology can be limiting if you're trying to do things in methods that were formed in the 70s.
Yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, I think maybe you're right that for instance, looking at kids growing up now with technology, young kids using the net and using computers in a way that I probably never would be able to, and they're doing that at the age of 6 and 7 and stuff like that. It might be completely different. Maybe these kids really are going to be so close to the technology that they are like instruments at their fingertips, and that's fantastic for them. I can only really sort of talk about myself because I think I'm part of a generation that kind of falls into a gap a little bit where computers were around me when I was growing up, but they weren't everywhere in society, and I didn't really sort of get interested in programming them or anything like that. So
yeah,
maybe you're right. I'm sort of caught between trying to make music in a traditional way. I mean, coming from a classical background as well, playing the cello, that's maybe how I've approached making electronic music.
One other thing, the idea of having lots of technology around one in order to make music, I think it's easy, unless you have an extremely strong vision of what you're going to do and really understand the stuff that you have available, it's very easy to become bogged down in the choices. Well, we could do this, we could do that, we could do this, we could do that, and so often one ends up doing nothing under those circumstances. Nothing happens because just take a tentative step and, well, if we're doing that, we're not really doing that. One of the better exercises that I did with a friend of mine was we would get together every week and we would each bring about 6 samples of anything. And we'd sit there and we'd go, we're going to make a song out of this afternoon. And they weren't always great, but just saying, okay, this is all we have, it was liberating, in fact. We didn't have to worry about, let's get another snare sound. It's not a right snare sound. It's like, well, we're going to have to work out what we got here. What are we going to do? It was great. It was really the right thing to do. And like I said, it doesn't necessarily turn into great work, but it's an exercise. It's like doing scales or something like that. It's just like figuring out, how to use what you got in front of you.
I feel the same way, because that's really what I found with remixing, especially when I first started remixing. I found it really easy because there was already a limit to what I could use. And therefore, you're not going to get lost in endlessly searching for the next sample, or this is what you're going to work with. You've got to make the best of that, and it's kind of in a similar way to how we're talking about if you're limited to one piece of gear and you get the most out of that piece of gear. It's the same with working with a set range of samples where you've got to make the most of those samples. So you're really going to push them and twist them up and really sort of work them, milk them for everything you can.
Yeah. Which is kind of what makes remixing fun. I've done a couple of remixes too, and it's wonderful for that. You're sort of, okay, well, here's the lyric, or here's the melodic, the piece of the melodic line that they want you to use, and that, to me, that the hard work's already done then. You don't have to come up with the grand concept. It's sort of done.
That's right. There's a bit of sort of instant. There's a creative seed there already, isn't there?
I'd like everybody to know here that you're extremely unlikely to read anything like this in a magazine. Simple reason is that the magazines exist to serve their advertisers, not to serve the readers, to serve the advertisers, because they're the ones who pay the bills. If there was something in it that suggested that maybe you don't need the latest whiz-bang of one of their advertisers, that's a good way to lose an advertiser. And any magazine, even the really good ones, will think twice before they do it. I can't remember ever reading the kind of wisdom that you guys are imparting this afternoon. And, that it worries me that's the state of the musicians' press today.
Getting back a little bit to the part of getting engaged with technology, if someone just showed up today and listened to you guys, it might look like that you are like knocking down technology or upgrading technology. And I don't think that you meant that, because sometimes going upgrading your software and finding out that you don't need all that stuff sort of upgrades the older software that you've got, and you feel more reassured about the thing that you were doing, right?
I don't feel one way or the other, I must say. I don't worship technology, and I don't hate it. It's just what I use. It's what's there. It's what's available to me to make music in the context that I make it. I mean, when I was younger, what I had in my hand was the cello. And then when I got to a certain age, because of the culture and the social situation I was involved in, and the music that was surrounding me, then what I had with me to make music was technology. That's just a sort of, it's not really a good thing, it's not really a bad thing, it just is. And so I don't really have any sort of emotional feeling towards technology at all, either way.
Yeah, right, but it's a good attitude to be the minimum, at least, updated with technology, to know what's going on, not necessarily to buy it or to achieve it, but trying to find out.
I don't know. I think there's amazing music being made by people who've locked themselves in studios and sort of haven't seen the outside world for 5 years. It's I don't think you really have to keep up with the latest technology or even know what's happening in technology to be making good music. I mean, it's funny, I was saying to Steve earlier that you almost get to a situation now where everyone's using digital equipment, everyone's using the Logic and plugins, blah blah blah, and people are sort of you get this whole sort of swapping of crap plugins and stuff, and it's like, yeah, do you want some plugins? I've got this great plugin, and it sounds just like a certain piece of analog gear that's still available for absolutely next to nothing if you go and look on eBay. So it just seems a little bit back to front, It's like, well, actually, why don't you just go and get that bit of gear, hook it up, sample it, or even just use it, It just seems really ridiculous and a really long-winded way of going around, getting the valve compressor sound. Well, I know valve compressors are a bit expensive, but, they're not. You can make them actually. You know what I mean? If you get why not use a real one?
But sometimes the emulation is the only stuff that you get access to. So
that's true. Yeah, that's true.
Because you're talking from England. In Portugal, if I had a Mellotron, I'd be happy.
Okay, right, fair enough. I mean, when it comes to classic bits of kit, fair enough. But then again, you do hear fantastic tracks being. I mean, Madlib, for instance. He's using a bit of kit that's so obsolete I don't even know what it is. It's some EMU sampler that he takes on the road with him that he says is worth about $300. And I'm sure everyone who listens to his music would agree. It's neither here nor there. The quality of his sound is not really the thing. I mean, some of his productions sound awful, in terms of the mix down, and if you to analyse the frequencies that are going on in there. But there's such a heavy vibe on them, it doesn't really matter, does it?
Yeah.